Pak Samedi Fahrudin, Pak Aris Setiawan, juga Bapak Ibu pejabat di lingkungan Kementerian Sekretariat Negara khususnya yang menangani analisis kebijakan dan analisis hukum peraturan perundang-undangan. Siang hari ini adalah sesi kita yang pertama untuk serial lecture dengan judul Global Challenges and the Future of Trade, Implications for Policies yang akan disampaikan oleh Prof. Siah. Beliau adalah profesor dari Victoria University of Wellington. Sekilas tentang beliau juga bekerja di, beliau adalah direktur di SEA yang merupakan organisasi yang mewadahi semacam yang saat ini Bapak Ibu saksikan semua di sini. Ada 24 orang rombongan dari New Zealand yang merupakan mahasiswa dari 7 universitas yang ada di New Zealand. Mereka ingin belajar tentang Indonesia dan negara-negara di Asia Tenggara. Nanti setelah sesi pemaparan dari Prof. Siah, kita akan membuka juga sesi untuk mereka bertanya tentang apa sih Kementerian Sekretariat Negara dan seperti apa peran kita di pemerintahan. Dengan tidak berpanjang waktu, sambil menunggu Pak Gogor mungkin sedang ke belakang, ke bawah, sorry Pak, nggak kelihatan. Oke, selanjutnya kami persilahkan kepada Pak Gogor untuk menyampaikan welcoming remarks. So for the next agenda, we will have Bapak Gogor Okonur Haryoko, our special staff to the Minister of State Secretariat in the field of politics, defense, and security, to deliver welcoming remarks for the session, for opening the session as well. Pak Gogor, please.
Thank you, moderator. Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon us. Honorable Profesor Siah Hwe Ang, do I have to pronounce your name properly? And the team, the student of Tertiary Market Immersion Program, MIP from New Zealand, and all the participants of this mini serial lecture. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Gogor Okonur Haryoko. Currently, I'm serving as the Senior Advisor to the Minister of State Secretariat in the field of politics, defense, and security, which doesn't have anything with the topic of this afternoon lectures. And I am here representing the Principal Secretary, Mr. Setia Utama, who is unfortunately unable to attend this lecture. He sends his best greetings to all participants, especially to our distinguished guest, Profesor Siah Hwe Ang, and our fellow participant from New Zealand. I would like to deliver his remarks, so please allow me to deliver the entire remarks of him on behalf of the Principal Secretary. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, Honorable Profesor Siah Hwe Ang and the team of Tertiary Market Immersion Program from New Zealand and all the participants of this mini serial lecture. Please allow me to cordially welcome you all to the Ministry of State Secretariat. Being still in the second week of the year 2020, we would like to wish you a happy new year 2020. May this year bring you more prosperity, happiness, and success. Please allow me to extend our deep regret on behalf of the Minister of State Secretariat, Professor Pratikno. He was actually keen to attend this lecture and to greet all the participants, especially from New Zealand. However, due to his necessity to attend a meeting with the President, right at this time, he is unable to be with us in this lecture. To Honorable Professor Siah, please allow me on behalf of the Minister to deliver our highest appreciation for your availability to share your thought and wisdom with us today. To our distinguished fellow from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, on behalf of the Minister, I would like to welcome you to the Ministry and to Jakarta for those who for the first time coming here. We hope that you enjoy your stay in Jakarta, and we hope that your visit might strengthen the relationship between Victoria University of Wellington Ministry of State Secretariat of Indonesia. Honorable Professor Siah and fellow participants. The topic of discussion today, which is global challenges and future of trade implication for policies, is important and quite relevant with our national agenda in the next 5 years. In the next 5 years, trade sector remains important factor in Indonesia economic transformation. In a broader extent, Indonesia economic transformation also plays an important role in the promotion of economic and trade development at the regional and global levels. Indonesia is the largest economic power in ASEAN, the 16th largest economic power in the world, and is member of the G20 community, and one of the leading economic power that has been able to score positive economic growth in the range of 5% over the past few years. Regarding the advancement of the trade sector, President Joko Widodo in his inaugural address to the second period of his administration on October 2019 had mentioned several keywords in national development in the next 5 years. Namely, the first one is human resource development. From 2019 till 2024, Indonesia is in the phase of enjoying demographic bonus. For this reason, all development sectors are directed to support the improvement of human resources capacity, primarily through the expansion of creativity and innovation, as well as mastery of scientific and technological development. We will direct various policies in the economy to synergize with the improvement of human resources capacity, especially creativity and innovation. In the next 5 years, the government will give priority to the development sector which is able to support the increasingly competitive economic growth which is based on creativity and innovation. Secondly, in facilitating economic growth in the next 5 years, the government will continue bureaucratic reforms combined with regulation reform and expansion of infrastructure development. With regard to bureaucratic reform, the government continues to ease of doing businesses, trimming regulation, and simplify bureaucratic structures that are in direct contact with licensing and investment. The government also strives to integrate various rules so that they can work together and do not overlap with one another. The government has initiated the preparation of omnibus law in various sectors to ensure that policy synergies that support the acceleration of economic development. Towards the expansion of infrastructure development, the government is expanding the ease of productive and constructive investment that supports the expansion of employment and the mastery of science and technology. Equally important, the government remains active in addressing various treaties and international economic agreements. The government promotes interactive and communicative trade diplomacy through the WTO and other bilateral forums in responding to the dispute of export and import activities with Indonesian partners across the world. The government also wisely responded to the dynamics of world trade that had global implications, such as currently the US trade war with China and Chinese assertive attitude in implementing Belt Road Initiative or BRI. In principle, the government of Indonesia has chosen to implement an international trade cooperation scheme that supports increased economic competitiveness, supported by increasing human resource creativity and innovation. Regarding the success of the economic development agenda in the next 5 years, we welcome the ideas, remarks and suggestions that will be presented by Professor Siah. We request the participant from the Ministry of State Secretariat to seize this opportunity as an access to widen your knowledge capacity that will helpful in making better and more updated analysis in your subsequent tasks. Finally, to Professor Siah, on behalf of the Minister of State Secretariat, please allow me to thank you again for your ability to share your wisdom with us. We have got informed that this is your second visit to our ministry, so we hope that in the future we can continue this discussion to exchange ideas for our mutual benefits. I wish you have a pleasant and fruitful discussion. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, Principal Secretary Mr. Setia Utama. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gogor Okonur Haryoko. Next, we will have Prof. Siah who will deliver our main speech for today. Please allow me to introduce him properly by reading his CV. Prof. Siah Hwe Ang is a professor of international business and strategy and the inaugural BNZ chair in business in Asia, a position sponsored by the Bank of New Zealand, Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, New Zealand Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment, and New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. So no wonder he's here today in that capacity. In this role, Prof. Siah works closely with various stakeholders and companies on their strategies in Asia and Asia's engagement in New Zealand. Most recently, he joins the leadership team of the New Zealand ASEAN Business Alliance and the board of the ASEAN NZ Business Council. Professor Siah also chairs Victoria University of Wellington's Enabling Our Asia Pacific Trading Nation Research Distinctiveness Team, one of the 8 pan-university research areas. In 2018, Professor Siah also became the director of the Southeast Asia Center for Asia Pacific Excellence, or SEA-CAPE, New Zealand. It is a national center operated by the University of Auckland, University of Otago, University of Waikato, and Victoria University of Wellington. Besides, Professor Siah also sits on the National Assessment Panels for New Zealand Prime Minister's Business Scholarship, Prime Minister's Scholarships for Asia, and Marsden Fund. So anybody who is willing to join scholarship in New Zealand can come to him. Before joining Victoria University of Wellington, Professor Siah was also Professor in Strategy and Associate Dean Postgraduate and International Asia at the University of Auckland Business School, a Research Fellow at Cass Business School, City University in London, and the National University of Singapore, where Professor Siah completed his PhD there. Professor Siah is also visiting professor to a few ASEAN universities, including in China, if I'm not mistaken, bro, and the consulting editor of the Journal of World Business, a top international business journal. He also writes frequently in the media. So without further ado, we will have Professor Siah here today to deliver his talk. Prof. Siah, the floor is yours.
Can I sing louder? Is it okay? Because there's live streaming, right? just in case I fall asleep. Right, okay, so thank you very much, Google, for all the praises and welcoming us, in the middle or just after the flood. So apologies for that, but I think since the flood, we have been treated quite well with your very nice weather, not so humid, not so hot, but we are going down to Kuala Lumpur tomorrow, so basically I think it will be another 5 degrees warmer and more humid. Right, so I asked my New Zealand colleagues to actually prepare for that one, right, because we better celebrate the breeze from Jakarta first before we have to run down to Kuala Lumpur tomorrow. Now, thank you again for the ministry to have me here again and accommodate us for coming sort of very early in the days of the 2020. But as we all know that the year is always going by very quickly. The last time I was here is almost 6-7 months ago. I can still recognize some sort of familiar faces, and so on and so forth. Of course, I've reminded them that if they see the same slides, just don't ask any questions again, just to make sure that we are all on the same page rather than the wrong page. Okay. Yes, okay. Now, without further ado, let me try to get into some of the dynamics of the topic itself, global challenges and the future of trade implications for policy. Now, I'm a very poor guy of sort of introducing myself, so thanks, Yanti, for reading out the long essay that I was putting inside there, and, just makes me feel that I'm under a bit of pressure. It's good that I didn't take the very nice lunch, which I shall actually taste it later, after I do my job first, right? Global challenges, right, non-ending story, and we know that I think when we first arrived, for those of the, our New Zealand folks here, and when we come to Jakarta, we will feel that there's a bit of a challenge because the size, right, of Jakarta, the size of Indonesia is not something that New Zealand has experienced before, right? We have about close to maybe 4.7, 4.8 or 5 million people. How many people do you have in Jakarta? Huh? 10, 12, 7? No, can't be right. Yeah. So maybe about at least 10 million, right? Okay, so at least 2 or 3 times the size of the whole New Zealand, right, as a country. So everything is very big, right, comparatively, and especially the shopping mall, which is excellent. Okay, and then basically the number of, on my phone where I actually have my footsteps, actually I need to walk a lot more than when I was in Wellington. That one is for sure. Now let me jump straight into some of the kind of important things in this part of the world, right? I will jump very quickly in terms of a few slides. Now, the structure goes like this, right? So I will briefly go through a few bullet points so that we are all on the same page about what are the key important things. I will ask a few questions. I will ask do a few analyses about certain situations that I've been looking at it for the last, 6, 10, or 12 years or 15 years. And then we will ask some questions about what should be done in the policy space, which is quite important, right? At the end of the day, when you do policies, it takes time, right? It takes 1, 2, 3 years to craft any policy, but yet I think we are talking about a situation that, the world is so disruptive that within about, let's say, a month or a day, right, things that can change, especially if you are reading Donald Trump's tweet every night, right? Things can go sour very quickly, and your policies may need adjustments. Now let's have a common understanding of what has been going on around the world, right? So major developments in international business in recent times, and that affects almost every country. Even in New Zealand, we discussed quite a lot in the context of Brexit, which is of course UK running out of the European Union. The US election, which is like surprised ending there, the outcomes, and that is almost back to back, quite close to each other in terms of those two events. Significantly, in the context of ASEAN, to which we are here for this period of 3 weeks, we do have the ASEAN Economic Community set up, and we were glad that we were visiting the ASEAN Secretariat yesterday morning and IREA yesterday afternoon. So we had a lot of, pumping of knowledge about ASEAN, right, throughout the whole day yesterday. Now, we do have the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, to which is set up by China, which will sort of in some ways funds a lot of these infrastructural developments across Asia and maybe even in Africa and Latin America as well. Now, some of these things I will go through when I discuss a bit further in the next few slides. Then, as Gogo has mentioned, One Belt, One Road, right, is always a catchy one. because One Belt, One Road runs deep into any parts of the world. We all have belts, we all have roads, but then the only question is whose belt and whose road, and who owns them is the question, and who funds them. And if whoever that funds them, does it mean that they own them, right? That will be the next question, right? We can have a discussion about that too, right? Now, comprehensive and progressive trans-Pacific partnership is going to get longer and longer if United States come back again, or if some other country like China is going to join. Now, this is the TPP that once upon a time used to have US, but US just dropped out, right? And that's quite a promising, sort of a promising one for US maybe to him, right? But definitely not a promising one to the TPP itself. Then we also have the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, that's been concluded recently. Somehow we have been waiting every December to let it conclude, and finally, after, what, 3, 4, 5 years of talking, right? Finally, this December, which is a few weeks ago, the negotiation has completed, right? The next phase is to have to ratify some of these agreements. Back. Go back. Yeah. Right. Okay. So I want to go through this. I don't want to go through this slide in detail because I've just mentioned that. As you can see from the front, right under the CPTPP, right, I highlighted under the first item that US has actually left, right, after a while. And in fact, the loss of US in this particular case has resulted in the CPTPP losing about 60% of the economic size, as well as losing 40% of the trade size, right? So that was significant loss in terms of losing the largest economy in the world in the TPP arrangement that resulted in the CPTPP. Now we do have the regional RCEP, right, which is called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and of course, no surprise then, New Zealand is in every one of these, so we are always there, right? Part of the game plan is always to try to go into any one of those. That will be fun. Now, and India, of course, unfortunately refused to join, but I'm sure my Indonesian counterparts will always tell me that India is not easy, right? Some of you would have negotiated with India and they change their mind every 2 hours, roughly, or every 2 minutes, right, for that matter, right? Okay, we can talk a bit about that and how that actually can happen. But RCEP seems to be having a push towards it despite losing India. India is not the biggest economy in RCEP because that's China as the largest economy inside the RCEP. So it's not it's not the biggest loss yet as we speak in that group, right? That's why the effect is not so strong compared to the loss of the US from the TPP. Now, so that is the copy and paste slide from the previous slide. Now, I asked the questions. Brexit, when will this actually happen? Right, we have been talking about Brexit since the days whereby it's a shocker in May, right, a few years back when we have that Brexit announcement to say, okay, let's go for it. And since then, we have been pushing, right, until the day that we have no idea when that will actually happen. And you know why we don't know why that is happening? It's because nobody has an idea how this works. Okay, in the real world whereby we talk about contracts and transactions, we know when we want to terminate a contract. We know when a contract needs to be terminated, right? When an agreement will finish, like a free trade agreement. But what if one party wants to get out of it? Apparently there's no clause, right, in the EU setup that says that a country can ever leave the European Union. And that's a bit scary, yeah? It's like letting you into a room and then lock the door and throw the key away, right? And good luck to everyone, right? So that was a break for it. Now we do have the US elections. The question here is whether the impeachment will ever happen, right? 4 years, and my take is very simple. My take is the question of whether US has the stomach to shoot down your own president so that it looks bad in front of the Chinese, right? And I got, my personal prediction is that they will hang on to him for a while, right? And because we are talking about a situation that they will have to deal with the Chinese first, or China first before, you know, shooting your own people, right? That will be my guess. Now, I asked the questions of all my ASEAN colleagues, right, in general. ASEAN Economic Community, 4 years on, what has been achieved, right? And are we as sort of economically integrated as we hope it should be under the EEC umbrella. Now we can have a discussion about that. My guess is that I can see a few smiling faces there already, right, is that we are still ongoing discussion. We know ASEAN is very diverse, but at the same time, it is critical to understand that, you know, this economic community was set up, what, December 2015? I understand that was 4 years ago, and wow, we are into 4 years, so the question here is, are we really into an economic integration that really plays ASEAN as a region, or as almost like a small country on its own that can really rise up to the top and to negotiate with China, India, and the US, and so on and so forth. Now, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank seems to be working and serving more purpose, making a lot of collaboration with the World Bank, ADB, and so on and so forth. So a bit of uncertainty around the fact that it was set up by the Chinese or initiated by the Chinese is gone away, right? Yet questions remain: what kind of investment actually get funded out of the AIIB, right? There's a lot of lingering questions, even though the Chinese or one of the China guy is actually chairing the committee. Right, the committee does have every nationality involved. The question here is the kind of power that they probably have in terms of the investment inside the AIIB. Now, the One Belt, One Road initiative, which I will have a few slides later on around this, is always the question of whether China's soft power will ever become stronger. Right, that's the big question, because we know that China's hard power is there, right, economically, too much money. Right, I will talk about how much money they have later on. I'll make you make a guess of how much money they got, right, in terms of the kind of investment or consumption or kind of bank deposits and so on. But at the same time, the world hasn't been ready, right? There's no way any country, or in particular those developed countries, will ever admit that China, right, is really up there with them. Right? And that's the bottom line. So if China tries to lead something, the answer is no way, right? And by the time, in about 5 years' time, Indonesia will say the same. Well, China wants to lead us, no way. Right? We'll be there too, right? The Indonesian economy is growing very significantly fast, that there will be questions asked around that. Now, I had talked about a comprehensive and progressive trans-Pacific partnership. Right? Since the US exit, there has been a lot of questions asked about who is next, right? So you lose US, but you have Japan. But Japan has a lot of trade policies that doesn't allow you to trade in a lot of areas like, you know, agriculture and all these things, right? Then, of course, you can't trade with them on some of these things, then you lose a lot of value. And a lot of other countries are getting worried, like Vietnam, right? So Vietnam is one of the big targets because of its 97 or 98 million people inside there. The problem is that once you have the TPP set up, then you open up Vietnam to a lot of multinationals, which means that the country is floodgated with foreign investment or foreign multinational companies, and your local companies may or may not survive. Right? And that's one of the catch there, right? Before your multinational starts to get strong, you should try to have your local champions. Right? And we know that in terms of large countries, you guys are probably supporting a lot of your local companies to make sure that they are stronger. I think in New Zealand, we are trying very hard to do the same. No guarantees that we have done a great job in New Zealand either. Right? Now, we do have the RCEP that minus India, and the question here is, will India ever join? And how will that affect the dynamics of the partnership? Right? And ASEAN is responsible, right, led by countries such as Indonesia and Singapore, will be responsible to try to get India to the party. But I suspect that India will always complain that China is there. I'm worried about China. Right? And if that is always the case, then you will never see India in the RCEP forever. Right? And we know that India and China is just going to go even worse. Especially China is helping out with Pakistan on their infrastructure. And we know Pakistan and India is a global sand between them. Right? You'll get shot in the middle of nowhere. So, now, let me go back to a few fundamentals, right, of what is happening around the world, and I actually can give you a few bullet points about the importance of where we are and what it could be, right? Now, world product trade is slowing down. So in front of you, you see a curve there. It's interesting. Trade has gone up and then significantly come down in about 2008. Now, we know that's the global financial crisis, right? But it has since bounced back in 2009, 2010, 11, maybe 12, right? But it has actually gone down tapered. Now, I emphasize that this is only product trade, so services trade is actually going up slowly, but not significantly, right, in the last at least 2 years. You ask the question, if everyone is signing free trade agreements, how come trade is down? What is the purpose of an agreement when when the volume actually comes down? What is the agreement for? The agreement is supposed to increase the volume, right? So it doesn't make any sense. This data is basically a bit like ironic in many ways, right? One is up, the other one is down. Shouldn't be the case. It's supposed to be positively correlated. Now then we ask the question, is globalization a story of the past? We say we want to set up free trade agreements and yet the volume has come down. But of course the simple answer is to say that free trade agreements is not free, right? Right? Because trade is never costless. Nobody says trade is costless, right? It's just saying that, you know, the tariffs can be zero, but it didn't say that you don't have to pay, right? And that's the part that really bites on the fact that we have free trade agreements, but yet we are not utilizing the free trade agreements to reduce the cost of trade, right? Which is quite interesting. We must try to solve these over time. So that's the issue there, right? What are the issues here? And that's the issue. The issue here is that there seems to be a lot of signing of free trade agreements, and yet at the same time we actually don't think about reducing costs. We are just saying that we just need the agreements to move forward. And also partially because of that, and partially the reason for that is that protectionism is on the rise. Right, I'm happy to share this slide so you don't have to copy everything, but there are a lot of still disputes, for example, like anti-dumping tariffs on China, China's duties on EU, Japan, South Korea for materials in power transformations and electric motors, and India's duties on hot rolled steel products from China, Japan, South Korea, Russia, Brazil, and Indonesia. So everyone is attacking everyone else, right? And of course, you pass this problem to World Trade Organization. Now it's collapsed, right? I will come back later on. Donald Trump just killed it, so, right? Okay. And of course, interestingly, of course, you know, U.S. high-speed trains must be manufactured by the U.S., right? So talking about any economy that is the free world, right? We ask the question, right? What is a free world? As in a free market, right? If you ask a lot of senior economists that I know of across the globe, right? Nobody will agree that a country will ever be a free market. No country is a free market. If U.S. can have rules like U.S. high-speed trains must be manufactured by U.S., it's not a free market anymore, right? Okay, so basically we are talking about a lot of situations whereby we think we want free trade agreements, we want trade to go up, but yet we have a lot of protectionism for various reasons as well. Will this stop? The answer is for sure no, right? No way. And one of my analyses will be able to tell you that, you know, I think a lot of countries does not know what globalization means. It means that your citizens will lose your job, right? It means that, you know, your local players, your grocery stores will be eaten up by Walmart, right? Okay, I always joke, in New Zealand, Walmart is never in New Zealand. Why? Because we don't have enough human beings to buy from Walmart, unless the Walmart to New Zealand is only selling products for sheep and cows or something like that, then we will have enough of a market. But Walmart will be here anytime, right? You want, in Indonesia, you have about 260 over million people, right? Walmart is a very big market for them, significant, right? So they will jump in anytime. They will jump into Vietnam anytime, let alone, you know, if you want to give them Indonesia, for sure you are here, right? So they will be here if you open it up, but at the same time, right, protectionism always needs to go up, right, for the same reason. Now, it's interesting, in the last 1, 2 years or 3 years, my understanding is that a lot of countries across the globe are working on non-tariff barriers, right, and this is part of the regime around the fact that we have so many mechanisms. I call them font size 6, right? In any contract, there's always like, this is all great, except you can't do this, can't do that, and that can't do things is actually longer than do things, right? So we do have that kind of things whereby, you know, protectionism, to ensure that protectionism will never ever stop. Now, a quick slide, and this slide, I'm sure a few people in this room would have seen it, because these numbers will never change, because it's backdated to 2014 to 16. I was just trying to illustrate the fact that you look at the ASEAN figures under the top part, right, the world product trade. right, across the globe. Notice that in 2014 to 16, it has come down for the world, but yet it has actually gone up in terms of ASEAN. Right, now the same applies to the service side of things. Right, you will see ASEAN figures going up slowly, right, but yet you actually see the total world service trade coming down significantly. Okay, and that's because in the last 2-3 years we are facing a lot of imbalance and uncertainty, because we are talking about 2015 and 16 period whereby we talk about, you know, the uncertainty surrounding Brexit and all these US election years and so on. Now what you also experience is that the ASEAN is starting to get together, to act together, and basically starting to feel that, you know, sort of the moving forward kind of step forward. Now, yesterday we were at ASEAN Secretariat, and basically I think the figures coming out from that session was that about 213 million, right, ASEAN population will be in the age group of 15 to 24. Right, that's 1/3 of ASEAN's population, literally, is in the age group of 15 to 24. Now, when do I get to be so young again? Now, of course, the lingering question is around China's Belt Road Initiative, which is already here, right, in Indonesia for sure, with all your train stations and other things, and the Bandung-Jakarta line and so on, right? So a lot of resistance there. Now, and one of the significant things around this Belt Road Initiative is that if you look at the Belt Road Initiative, right, the top part, which is orange, is actually the belt, right? And that's because it's called the Silk Road Economic Belt. Right, and the bottom part, which is the bluish part, is actually the road, which is the 21st century maritime Silk Road. So the road becomes the sea, right? So the road becomes the sea, right, and the belt becomes the road, right? So some people are confused, like why is the sea called the road and the road called the belt and so on and so forth, but that's how it comes from, right? So it's actually the Silk Road Economic Belt, right? Actually, that's the belt. Okay, and one of the five major things about the Belt Road Initiative you can see is policy coordination, facilities connectivity, unimpeded trade, financial integration, and people-to-people bond, right? So it's more than infrastructure. Now, even back in New Zealand, we have a common understanding in New Zealand, various discussions even for years now, is that the understanding of the Belt Road Initiative from China is that it's all about infrastructure. But in fact, the motto, right, the general goals of the Belt Road Initiative is not just about infrastructure. It's around other things that sits on the infrastructure, which is also policy integration, financial integration, policy coordination, and people-to-people bond. Right? And those things sits on top of the infrastructure that I can tell you a bit more. We can have a bit of discussion more. I don't want to go through that in detail. Everyone is shocked when China announced this initiative about, wow, they are going to create all these airports, ports, shipping lines and everything, container shipping and so on. Everyone asks the question, like, how much money do they have to be able to do things like that? So it turns out that they were not doing anything very new, right? So if you look at this map alone, the one belt, which is cutting from the east of China to the west of Europe, is actually at the top half of that map alone. Like you have China, Cambodia, Russia economic corridor, new Eurasia land bridge economic corridor, and then you have the bottom part as well, right, which is the road part of the One Belt, One Road, which is the BRI, which is Belt Road Initiative. Now you have that picture in front of you. You will notice that those are 6 economic corridors that are already existing. Most of them, unfortunately, are malfunctioned. Right? What China did was basically reset the whole thing, wake up the economic corridors, and try to link them together. Full stop. So in fact, the cost is sort of marginal rather than sort of incremental. I wouldn't say marginal, right? Incremental rather than dramatic. It's not totally new, right? It's just trying to wake those systems up to try to play in that sense. Now the belt did start in 2014. So you have a train that walks from Yiwu, the east of China, all the way to west of Europe, right? And that has run from that has started to run in November 18, 2014. Okay, and that is just about 1 year after the Belt Road Initiative got started, right? So the Belt Road got started in September. The belt is September 2013. The road is October 2013, right? So after about 1 year or 14 months, that is actually cutting across cargo only. Right? And in the real world, whereby the Belt Road Initiative over time becomes real, then human beings can actually travel from the east of China and Madrid on a holiday. You have a summer holiday, but right now, unless you are cargo, you cannot go on that train. Right? Okay, over time, there might be a holiday plan, right, cutting from the east of China to the west of Europe. But how about the road? Right? The road creates an issue, right, because we are talking about China needing to negotiate with ASEAN, right? And of course, we know in ASEAN, how much can you trust China? Right, okay? So it's still too big to trust, right, okay? It's still, I mean, ASEAN is growing, but it's not there yet. So you still know that they are powerful when it comes to negotiation about who gets what, especially at the end. So there was a lot of negotiation and arguments around that. What should we do with China, right? The ASEAN, what should ASEAN do with China in the road space? So that went on until the South China Sea arguments went on for about 1.5 years, right? 1.5 years later, August 2015, right, the tribunal, right, in the United States basically says that the Philippines won that tribunal hearing, but China just said, no, I'm not going to listen to your bullshit, right? Okay, you know that happens, right? Very quickly, the president went on news, what, a half an hour or 1 hour, just say, look, I veto that hearing, because as a United Nations Security Council member, permanent member, you can veto, right, these tribunal decisions, right? Most of you would know that because you work in the ministry around that. Now, big questions about what is the BRI, of course, we ask the question a lot because the world does have infrastructure gaps, especially Asia. 8.2 trillion, right, needed US dollars. Who has the money? Does Indonesia have that kind of money? Maybe not yet, right? Okay, but of course, if you lend people, you really have to know they can repay you back too, right? So that's the other challenge, right? After you lend them, can they afford to pay you back? Especially if you lend to, poorer countries in Asia or even, Africa and Latin America and so on and so forth. Is it about China having too much excess capacity so that they can dump things around, like steel dumping and all these things, right? Okay, questions has been raised. Discussion is inconclusive, I must say, right? Now, I've did some maths, and basically China's annual trade volume, as they calculated, right, with BRI countries, about 60 of them in the initial stage, right, was 1 trillion, right, in 2013. They expect it to grow to 2.5 trillion in a decade, 10 years later, right, in 2023. Right, I backward use the compound interest arguments and calculation, right, amounts to 9.6% annual growth. Now you can see why they veto the decision on the South China Sea, and that's because they are really relying on the BRI to actually improve their trade. That's 9%, 9.6% growth, right? One belt, one road. If the road is missing, there's only one belt, you won't get 9.6%. No way, right? So you lose half of your trade, bilateral trade or multilateral trade volumes, and because of that, then you lose a lot of money as a result. So they went quite furious about it because 9.6% annual growth is quite important for them. But of course, we know the BRI has security issues and local benefits, that will continue to be a big issue there, right? If we are doing a Bandung-Jakarta program with that, the question here is, do we want all the Chinese to start building it here and ship in 500,000 Chinese to start building the railway trade, right? Or should we get the Indonesian to do it, right? And questions like that get raised. And of course, then the Chinese will say, look, we do faster than you, right? Okay? Say something, right, in the process. So we can have a discussion around that if need be. Now, we got the question, the big question around the Belt Road Initiative is about lending money to poor countries who needs the infrastructure but cannot afford to pay back. Right? So a lot of the developed country ask the question, right? We are running into serious problems here because a lot of countries who borrow the money from China, their debt gets more and more serious on the right hand side there, the red color one is definitely to China. Right? Existing debt to China is down rate, and then the pinkish red one is expected additional debt to China. Look at that, right? So if China is going to dominate a lot of debt and these countries most likely can't afford to pay, we have a situation, does that mean that China owns some of the born a lot of these debt, right, issues there, right? So there's quite a lot of challenges to think about in terms of that, and countries to own, right, is the next big question to look at. There's always going to be economics security nexus. I think this, forget about those jumble up things in the main content, but basically last May when we have the second Belt and Road Forum, right, so-called the BRF second forum, May in Beijing, right? So a lot of countries surrounded China and asked the question, you keep lending money to other countries, if they cannot afford to pay you back, does that mean that they will have to go default, which means that you own them, right? So they surrounded them significantly and basically, you know, have a big fight about it, and then China promised on the right-hand side there, China says that they will try to do something about it. Okay, at this point, we don't know what is the answer to that, but then they say that they will do something about it. Let's take it for granted that they are going to do something about it. Right? A couple of slides back to the beginning. What happened here? What happened to the situation in Asia Pacific? Actually started here, right? If you actually think about it, quietly, China has become a very strong economy. And if you go to the roots of what happened, I bring you back to January 1994, when the yuan was devaluated by 33% to $1 to 8.7 yuan overnight. Right? It was actually dropped from about 6, right? If you go to the just below 6, right, all the way to 8.7. Now, when your currency drops like this, it gives you a lot of advantage for exporting. It becomes so cheap and fast, and you know everything is nice. So since then, China has sort of got the advantage all the way through to until today. Look at what is the today's value, right? Today's value is never below 6, as in $1 is never below 6 Chinese yuan. Okay, now, before, at about January 1994, that was definitely below 6. So China has got that significant advantage forever so far, right? What, 30 odd years, right? Has never resisted, and as a result of the fact that happened, there was a shock to the system in about 2013, when China became the largest trading nation in the world. If you look at the light blue and dark blue corner there, right? The dark blue is China, the light blue is US. 2009 is still US leading the way in terms of merchandise trade in trillions of dollars. 2010 getting closer, 2011 closer, 2012 super close. By 2013 it's gone. China leads in terms of the merchandise trade, become number 1. And since then, it has maintained as number 1 until last year as well. So far so good, they are still number 1. But the point here is that before that happens in 2013, there's no way we can imagine a world that US is not leading anything, right? GDP, money, US dollars is the main currency, right? Any economic indicators, US is always number 1. Japan is always number 2. Right? So sometimes Japan can be number 1 in particular electronics or technology, right? And sometimes maybe Germany is good in some, you know, machineries and so on and so forth. But US is predominantly number 1 in most of the key economic criteria. But this was the moment in 2013 whereby US is displaced by a country that was relatively untapped, like nobody keep track of them, and then it all of a sudden turns into this strange thing, which is the shock to the system. Now I drew this map out of interest, like China's GDP and GDP growth. It is very interesting. If you look at the red chart first, right? That is basically the size, the economic size, the GDP of China's economy. Right, 150, right? If you go to 1978 on your very left, that's 150 billion US dollars. Okay, it goes slowly go up. But look at 2007 and 8. It continues to go up despite the fact that there is a global financial crisis. Right? In fact, if you look at 1998, they were really hardly affected by the Asian financial crisis. Right? It has gone up significantly in a very sort of a sharp way since after, in fact, after just before the global financial crisis in 2008, and gone non-stop. Tapered off a bit in 2015 to 16, but actually keeps flying up again, right, non-stop. Now, what you also see in front of you, right, is that is that map, as in the line, the trend line. The trend line is actually going up decently, sort of a sharp edge. Now on the blue one is the GDP growth, right? Instead of a comma, you should treat that as actually a dot, 0 point something or 13 point something or those numbers, right? So every year they have been growing about 10+%, right, for many, many years. And only in the last, what, 6 years, they have actually stopped growing as fast and tapered to about 7 point something and 6 point something. But look at the numbers from 2013 all the way to 2018. You can see why is it like that? Because they are managing growth, right? Okay, it's managed, like every year you drop by 1 or 2, 0 point something percent, 0.1 or 0.2%. They are managing that growth, you can see. So it's no longer unstable. It's quite stable, but downwards, right? In fact, if you ask me to make a call on what will happen next, they will keep going down slowly, but managed way, right? So the next one might be 6.3 I think it's 6.2 last year or 6.3 last year, 2019. The statistics still not fully out yet, but I think that we will go now to about 6 in 2020, and then basically 5 or something after that, right? And that's not something that is unhealthy by all means, right? And that's what's going to happen to the GP there. But ASEAN, so-called the smaller creature of the big powers, is actually getting stronger and stronger. Now we do have a discussion around the Indo-Pacific strategy, to which Indonesia wants to be the leader, right, in that space. We do have the ASEAN centrality. Bear in mind, if you look at the world map, ASEAN is the center of everything in Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific, and so on and so forth. And there are two components of ASEAN, right? It's the land side of ASEAN, which is the CMLVT, right? And then the sea side, which is Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and so on, right? So the two aspects. Maybe there is a one belt, one road in ASEAN, right? The one belt is the CMLVT. The one road is actually Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, right? We do have an equivalent in ASEAN's context. Now ASEAN has its own kind of challenges of its own, right? So ASEAN do have a lot of tariff barriers or non-tariff barriers to fix. Now ASEAN does have a lot of investment flowing in, and internet economies is significantly sharp, and so is the technological space as well, right? So there's a lot of strong things happening, right? But we still haven't got a lot of sign about how far ASEAN has gone in terms of the AEC, right? In terms of those 3 pillars, how integrated, right, the region has become. I'm happy to talk about that a bit later. Now, jumping backwards and forwards from China, because I'm going to lead you to the US very soon, right? Is the fact that once upon a time, made in China was supposed to represent anything that is cheap, right? So you look at the underside of your shirt, everything is made in China. Now you turn around, oh, made in Vietnam, owned by China, right? So the Chinese don't make them anymore. They just outsource to Thailand and Vietnam and Mexico, apparently. So no longer made in China, you can't find them anymore. Right, the made in China these days is actually more like the bullet train on your right-hand side, right? The aeroplanes on your right-hand side, they are C919. That's their new plane, which is really sort of not fully tested yet, but it's getting out there. The last time I checked, they are trying to create an international airlines corruption, which is interesting. I wonder if that is out on that one. And then, of course, you talk about Shanghai City, right, on your bottom left, which is extremely technological savvy, which leads me to the fact that this initiative called the Made in China 2025 just keeps upsetting US quite a lot, right? And of course, I can almost assure you that the battles and the kind of battles that say shouting and sort of scolding each other or trying to abuse each other verbally will continue between China and US, but also in terms of the technology space, China does want to be a technology superpower by the time of its 100 years celebration, which is 2049, right? That's the 100th year. And what are the implications there? Right? China is now trying to dominate quite a lot of economic indicators, but now they're also trying to dominate the technology space. Right? So a lot of Chinese companies who are doing extremely sharp technologies like the ZTE and the Huawei and this and that, you will know that US is not going to really let them do a lot of things. Right? The last time I was in China in October, I was in the telecommunication company, right, having a conversation, and basically they say, because China now has 5 ambassador in New Zealand now constantly reflect to our New Zealand stakeholders back in New Zealand to say that just remember we are not a developed economy. They don't want to behave as a developed economy. They will behave like one, but they say that they are not one. According to GDP per capita, that's what their argument is. Right? So they are not going to admit that they are developed. And publicly, they were quite strong, right, in the language that they used when she spoke the last time around the fact that we are definitely not developed. Those are developed yet. We're still developing. Do they look alike? Maybe one point they will be pointing at each other.
Our audience in the YouTube, so.
Oh, okay.
And also, we only have 10 minutes.
Okay, no problem.
So we can expand our time for Q&A.
Okay,
Thank you.
because there's only about 4 slides.
Yep.
Okay, right. Look at the 2 pictures. I don't think they are pointing at each other, but at some point it might still happen, right? Once UK becomes Brexit, and you never know, right? Because Donald Trump is going after a lot of these other countries, and they leave UK alone for now. But you never know when that happens. When Brexit happens, it will be pointing at each other, having a big fight over it. Now I will skip these 2 slides just to bear you with the things. Let's jump on to policy considerations, right, significantly. Now, I got a few bullet points here to share with all my colleagues, both from New Zealand and as well as from Indonesia as well. Now, we do have a disruption to global value chains, full stop, right? Because of Brexit, which happens, because of China and US fighting each other, there's bound to be substitution, right? For example, now, a lot of manufacturing is big that we see coming out from China is going to Vietnam. But yet in Vietnam, they ask the question whether the Vietnam does have the skill set and scale to be able to perform what China is doing, right? We raise the question, when you do your policy, you really have to ask, right? If you are going to be the substitute in the war between US and China, are you ready to pick it up? Okay, because we are talking about very important high-tech skills or very significant advanced manufacturing skills that you are trying to use, and as a substitute for either one of those that you choose to work with, right? Whether you really have the abilities to do that. Now, we also have trade profiles and portfolios adjustments. So because of that trade war, a lot of countries are making adjustments to their trade profiles and portfolios in terms of who they trade with and what they trade with, and whether they rely services more than manufacturing, right? And if that's the case, then we really need to analyze the patterns of any key trading partners. Okay, so Indonesia must analyze your key trading partners to see how they have actually evolved, right? Yesterday, your key trading partner is no longer the same tomorrow, because it might still be trading the same thing, but they change their mind about certain things, and you should evolve as such, right, according to how they evolve. Now, we do have China's BRI, the Quads, which you are aware of in Indonesia. We do have the Indo-Pacific, to which India wants to drive forward. We do have the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, right, to which both, I think, Thailand and Indonesia are interested in. The jury is out on that one, right? There's too much arguments about who should have a better regional presence. Okay, just bear that in mind. Everyone is coming out with sexy words, right, trying to lead on something, but then it's not happening yet. Now, China's economic development and its role in the global economy, right? So we discussed about the BRI effect on trade. Now, that needs to be balanced with internal consumption. And just for information alone, 2019 bank deposits in China is about 27.4 trillion US dollars, right? Okay, I calculated for you guys in rupiah. That's 380.3 quadrillion rupiah. I don't think we get a chance to use that in New Zealand. That's a big number. I actually looked at my screen this morning a few times to make sure I calculated the number of zeros correctly, right? That would be about what, 15 zeros or something like that, right? Okay, which is the equivalent of New Zealand dollars 41.2 trillion, right, of savings. But of course, the Chinese government haven't been able to bring that out into consumption yet, which is a big question to be raised. Now, economic growth will slow and stabilize, but China will be still a lucrative market for a while, and that's definite, right? Now, just a quick highlight on the yuan, to which you might be interested to observe, right? Using the BRI initiative, right, China has been lending their yuan and spending their US dollars. And that's because they do have a lot of foreign reserves of US dollars. The balancing of the yuan versus the balancing on relying on US, right? And watch that space, right? I calculated the way every time they do a BRI initiative, they always send you yuan. And actually, unfortunately, you have to pay back on yuan, which means that increased the flow of the yuan in the international market. Take a look at that kind of analysis to be done as well. Now, the value of trade agreements is to be tested, right? There will be tensions between multilateral and bilateral agreements, right? The day after the RCEP negotiation closed between those 15 countries, China, Japan, and Korea starts to have their own trilateral discussion, right? And that's because they also want to play along around those bilateral or trilateral versus just being in the multilateral space. Protectionism will never go away, as I mentioned, right? And the collapse of the World Trade Organization will definitely cause a lot more problems than we suspect. But not that they have solved problems, right? So World Trade Organizations never solve a lot of disputes. Sometimes the disputes will take 3 years, sometimes will take 5 years, and sometimes even longer than that. Now, it will be important in the context of a trade agreement to sort of balance the economics, security nexus on society and sustainability. So in terms of the discussion that we normally have at the national level, or track 2 or track 1.5, it's always about economics and security. We don't discuss about the kind of societal effects and which means that policy that comes out for society and sustainability. I think a lot more needs to be done in that space. And finally, importantly, will there be a winner in the US-China fight? Is it about trade? Right? So every day we hear, oh, Donald Trump is going to put more tax onto 250 billion of Chinese goods and so on and so forth, right? And then the next day China will stamp another 80 bill just to respond to it, right? I believe that the trade is just a mechanism, right, to vie for positioning in the global value chain positioning as well as technology, right? That's actually the big fight for, is the future. The current fight of attacking each other on the tariffs is just a small thing. That's why it never happened, right? If you think about the 250 billion US dollars, slam that, US is trying to slam on China in recent times. Trust me, if you read back, they say that 3 years ago already. It's the same one. It's the same 250 billion dollars. It never happens, right? It's not about the money. It's actually about something else, which is generally the global value positioning as well as the technology. Now we are trending towards multiple platforms, unfortunately. So because of things like that, you find that not just, maybe also a bit of Southeast Asia as well, but China is creating a lot of their own platforms. Whether it's in Mandarin form or not, it doesn't matter, right? There's a bit of anti-globalization in terms of the system that we use. Right? Once upon a time, Apple USB cannot be plugged into a Mac computer, USB cannot be plugged in the Microsoft one. Now we can do both. I suspect we are actually going away from that again. That means we are heading in the direction of, if you go China, we need to bring 3 computers at a go, because you can't work on 3 systems, or you can't work on 1 system. And finally, of course, most importantly, I close the talk around this afternoon with the ASEAN's centrality, right? Okay, would ASEAN countries be closer in terms of the global chaos? It should be, right? I think it's quite important, because I think, as I said already, ASEAN is in the middle of that whole region whereby growth is, right? And in order to manage uncertainty, I think ASEAN should come a bit closer to each other on certain things like systems, non-tariff barriers, and how to make it simple. Right? And at ASEAN Secretariat, Yong has already said that there won't be a single currency. That would be my guess too. It doesn't make sense. We must learn from the euro, right? Collapse, that there shouldn't be a single currency. Maybe a single power plug could be discussed, right? So that I don't need multiple adapters. Every time I travel to ASEAN, I need about 5 of them, I suspect so, right? And it will cost me a bomb, right? Okay? And of course, finally, right, consensus. Right? ASEAN runs through consensus, but I think leadership is quite important as well, despite the fact that consensus means that there's no leaders, right? Because no one should be leading, everyone should have equal say, but there's always needs for somebody to actually step up and say, look, let's do this, and others shall follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Siah. Before we have our Q&A session, it will be an honor to us to introduce our ministry to our fellow guest in here. So, yeah, please go back to your seat, Rob. Do we have the video? We will play the video and we will request Mr. Gogor again to highlight a bit about what is our ministry, so our fellow guests here can have a little understanding what we are and what we are doing as part of the government of Indonesia. Apologize that the video will be in Bahasa, but hopefully it can give a slight understanding about our ministry. Let's watch the video.
Semua dimulai pada tanggal 17 Agustus 1945, momen di mana mereka yang berbeda disatukan dalam Indonesia. Dengan semua kekayaan di dalamnya, Nusantara memproklamasikan pembentukan sebuah negara. Untuk menjalankan roda pemerintahan pada tanggal 2 September.
This is our first president, Mr. Soekarno.
Membentuk Kabinet Pemerintahan Republik Indonesia pertama. Dalam peristiwa itulah diangkat seorang sekretaris negara dan juru bicara presiden. Sejak saat itu, Kementerian Sekretariat Negara tumbuh sebagai jawaban atas kompleksnya administrasi dan ketatanegaraan.
This is all our Minister of State Secretariat. This is our building.
Terletak di jantung kota Jakarta, Kementerian Sekretariat Negara memiliki posisi yang unik dan strategis. Secara garis besar, Kemensetneg bertugas menyelenggarakan dukungan teknis dan administrasi, serta analisis urusan pemerintahan di bidang kesekretariatan negara. Sederhananya, kementerian ini membantu presiden dan wakil presiden dalam menyelenggarakan pemerintahan negara. Terdapat 7 satuan organisasi yang melaksanakan fungsi-fungsi tersebut, yaitu Sekretariat Kementerian, Sekretariat Presiden, Sekretariat Wakil Presiden, Sekretariat Militer Presiden, Deputi Bidang Hukum dan Perundang-undangan, Deputi Bidang Administrasi dan Aparatur, dan Deputi Bidang Hubungan Kelembagaan dan Kemasyarakatan. Kemensetneg terus mengembangkan diri, menciptakan berbagai inovasi untuk menjadi kementerian modern, utama, transparan, dan mampu menjadi solusi akan
This is our minister.
segudang prestasi pun telah diperlukan. Semua ini sebagai bukti bakti kami kepada negeri ini.
Okay, that's small videos on the Ministry of State Secretariat. So we do have 7 echelon 1 level, as mentioned in the video before. We are the direct assistant to the president, by means that we provide protocol assistance and security assistance, as well as policy analysis and laws, and also law analysis to the President, which will be further elaborated by Mr. Gogor. Pak, please.
Thank you, Bu Yanti, my fellow participant from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, and Professor Siah. Well, actually, information about this ministry, we have got our website, and actually we have put all those information there in two languages, in English as well, with all the photographs and all the history and all the details. But for a quick glance on the information about this ministry, I'd like to begin with the notion that this ministry is the office of the Indonesian President and Vice President. So this is the place where the top leadership of the nation is taking place. All the top decision of this country is made here in this office. The President and the Vice President in this ministry is supported by four main bodies. The first is the Secretary of the President, the second one is Secretary of the Vice President, the third one is the Military Secretary of the President, the last one is the Secretary of the Minister of the State Secretariat. Each of the body has a sub-organization which help the President and the Vice President in exercising his leadership both as national leader and as leader of the government, because we are using this kind of, we call it as presidential system, which is the President is exercising both head of the government and head of state. Now, in terms of the daily activities, we are supporting the President in three main topics. The first one is analysis, the second one is technical stuff, and the third one is administrative activities. In terms of technicals, it's like presidential security, presidential programs, etc. And in terms of administrative is by supporting the President in terms of appointing the senior officials of the government, the ambassadors of Indonesia in friendly nation, etc. Probably the most important is in analysis activities, because this is the place where all the regulation and the policies are analyzed before authorized by the President and to some extent by the Vice President. So we have got here officials that doing analysis and coordination with with other ministries and with governors, and also with some our international counterparts, to precisely ensure that all the law regulation conform with the vision and mission of the President. So that's basically the main important task of this ministry, these analysis activities. In the past year, especially in the last 5 years, we are trying to ensure that the activities is getting more modern by applying the latest development of information technology. Such, for example, we are using IT to improve the process of analysis, administrative activities, and technical activities. Now we are moving toward by using more modern application of information technology by using like artificial intelligence and machine learning, so that all the policies and all the analysis that will be delivered to the President will be the best and the most accurate one based on the disruptive situation in this current situation, such as, for example, this problem that we are having with our Chinese government, like in Natuna Island. So we are trying to ensure that all the policy, the decision that made by the President has been analyzed properly, accurately, and precisely and timely, so that the President will deliver the best policies for dealing with any kind of disruptive situation in the current development. Now, what we have got here, the official from the State Secretariat here that we are now having this lecture, the minister has the ideas to to ensure that all officials in the Ministry of State Secretariat will have the top and most updated information about what's going on in this disruptive environment. So that's why he has initiated to have this lecture. We have got this lecture. It's like actually a kind of a serial lecture. We are not having this one, Professor, but we are having also this kind of lecture by inviting many experts from global environment to give and to update the knowledge capacity of our official. This is part of our effort to ensure that the president will have the best analysis, the best inputs before he decides and he authorizes his policy. That's probably some addition that I'd like to inform in this forum. Obviously, if you want to get more detail, we have got our website. You can have a look and can. I think the website has been modernized so that you can have interactive communication. You can ask to our official through our website, and basically you can ask everything, and our official will provide the subsequent answers. Maybe that's a quick bit about the ministry, but I suppose the main topic this afternoon is a lecture about global trade and all these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Gogor. So for our next agenda, we will have Q&A session. I will divide this session into two question and answer session. The first one, I would like to have 3 questions, and the second one, if we still have time, we will have 3 more, but if not, we will have only 2 questions. Anybody who wants to raise the question, please mention your name and the unit that you are coming from or the university that you're coming from. For our fellow guests from New Zealand, you can also ask some questions in this term. Okay? From that side, okay. One more. We have 1, 2. Okay. And here first. Yep. Name and unit.
Thank you very much, Profesor Siah. Maybe I want to ask you to discuss. My name is Adi. Sorry, my name is Adi. I come from Deputy for Legislation. I want to have some insight from you about, recently our president was very upset because in the context of U.S.-China trade war, there was about 33 factories that relocate from China to Asian countries, but they are not coming to Indonesia. They come to Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and because of that, President proposed to make omnibus law to facilitate the investment because our investment policy is not friendly for investors. So my question is how to compete this context, in the US-China trade war, because Indonesia is a big country, but maybe we lose about the competition. And in this context, how to get the benefit from US-China trade war itself? Maybe that's all. Thank you.
Next one, Mbak Teta.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Teta from the Vice President Secretariat. I have 3 questions. The first one is about TPP and RCEP. I want to get the next opinion because Indonesia isn't joined the TPP yet. According to the New Zealanders, what the New Zealanders get benefit from the TPP and RCEPs, and which more benefit to New Zealand's people from the trading from the trading when New Zealand among the member of TPP or when New Zealand the member of RCEP. And the second about how New Zealand protect the local product, especially horticultural product, when New Zealand commit to open the trades. Because New Zealand import many manufacturing product, then the horticulture, and how can the New Zealand protect the local product from the horticultural import. And the third is about the dispute the dispute New Zealand and Indonesia about non-export ores. How far New Zealand support Indonesia government to compete in the industry, because Indonesia wants export value add mining, not only ores, and how far New Zealand can support Indonesia to get more competitive in industry, in mining industry. Thank you.
The next one, Mbak, please.
Thank you. My name is Nuriani Yunus from Vice President Secretary. How big is China influence in New Zealand in terms of economic policy, since China is now the world's trade?
And can you repeat again? I can't hear you.
Thank you. How big is China influence in New Zealand in terms of economic policy, since China is now the world's top trader? Thank you.
Okay, we will answer these three questions first.
Okay.
You already got all.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks everyone for the questions. So I'll try to address as much as I can with the gentleman here. The first one, China doesn't love Indonesia was your question. Right, okay, so who else does China love, right, is the question. So China has a very peculiar positioning, right, in Asia. Right, China has the most number of neighboring countries in the world. How many do they have? Do you know? What? 14, right? Okay. So China is the only country that has got 14 neighbors exactly just sitting around it. Russia at the top, and then you count the side, India and so on, Nepal and everything, right? So China is very sensitive towards the neighbors, those who are on the land with them. I mean, sharing borders, basically we call it, right? And so China has been trying to use the BRI, or basically it's not just the BRI, but also in general, trying to invest in the CMLBT side, because they are actually land, right? It's easier to cope. Right? In order to invest in Indonesia, it feels a bit too further out. Not that they actually don't love Indonesia. They probably see a lot more of, trying to make their neighbors their friends first. That would be my first guess. Rather than to say, look, let's work with Indonesia, but just leave Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, alone, and then, don't help them, and instead go and work with Indonesia, which is further south of Asia, right? And that's one explanation, right? The Mekong explanation, the Mekong side of things, the CMLBT explanation, right? The second part is, of course, they probably feel that Indonesia is also not easy for them, right? Okay, not just because that it's far away, but also because Indonesia has a lot more bargaining power, and Indonesia, is more uncertain, as we all know, right? And your investment policy is probably also more difficult for them to understand, right? So just to be honest, here in this room is that we can say China is difficult to understand, but Indonesia could be worse, right? Right. So there is a kind of things that if you guys are really interested to pick up some parts of the Chinese investment overseas, right? There does need to be a bit more transparent in some parts, some sectors that you encouraged. You don't have to pick up everything, because by the time they come here, be careful what you ask for, right? They will all be here everywhere, right? But then once you pick up whatever sectors that you believe that they can contribute, then you can actually adjust your policy to invite them to be part of it. But otherwise, I can see them being very cautious about CMLVT, especially when Vietnam and Thailand are pushing very hard to try to create a CMLVT, the Mekong group, right? Getting stronger and stronger, working with Yunnan and Japan in that region as well, right? So you can see that they have a lot of railway stations and train rails that actually link those countries together. So that will be my short response to a potentially long answer. Would you be happy with the answer, or? How to get benefit? Maybe you can cut a deal with Mr. Trump or President Xi for that matter, right? So actually, I can only say that you must leave it up to you guys to decide, right? Whether you want to be in the middle of those two, or you want to be saying, look, I can work with US on one thing, but I would insist that I want to work with China on another thing. And I think Indonesia is a big enough economy to negotiate for that you don't have to pick one side or the other, right? Which means that you will still get benefit because there will be substitution, but there won't be a case whereby I suspect that Indonesia can just ditch one or the other and basically just go and hug Mr. Trump and cut deals with him all the time, because he might change his mind overnight using his tweet and say Indonesia is no longer my friend, right? And I think that will be my short response to your long question. Your question doesn't really have a straightforward answer to it, because it really depends on what is the positioning within Indonesia, how you want to play it as you move to become a very strong economy yourself, right? Bear that in mind that you are also becoming very strong economy on its own. Can I? Okay, we can talk later. So. Now, New Zealand's question. Okay, there are a couple of questions that I probably should not be the right person to answer. Probably our New Zealand ambassador is a better person to answer that question. Now, you ask me TPP versus RCEP. Now, which one is better? If you ask, the discussion in New Zealand is we love everyone, right? So they will tell you we love the TPP, yet we love the RCEP too, right? And that's because in the New Zealand terms, right, every market is bigger than us, right? If you look at most of either TPP or RCEP, right, New Zealand will have to be one of the smallest economy in both. And because of that, if you're a small economy, you don't lose much. Like I say, Walmart is not interested, so don't worry, right? TPP, no problem, just sign, because Walmart won't be there, right? By virtue of the fact that it's small, it does have a certain advantage. It does make sort of ambitious companies run away for their dear life, right? Which is actually what we want. So accidentally, there's some protection, right, that exists for smaller economies on a few industries, right? So if you ask me, there's no answer to that, but basically we love them all, right? From the New Zealand's perspective, it's just that individually we also have, in New Zealand we have a lot of bilaterals, like with Singapore, with Chile, we have the P4 with Chile and Singapore as well, and now there's this digital e-commerce, right, which is extremely big thing, right? Digital e-commerce with Chile and Singapore as a trilateral on the digital e-commerce space. And speaking of digital e-commerce, it was interesting because most recently, New Zealand and China has got the upgraded sort of version. I don't think it's fully finalized yet, it's still under ratification. The upgraded free trade agreement between New Zealand and China. There seems to be an e-commerce chapter to it, so it's interesting. I heard they just put it last minute, so I don't know what's inside. Nobody knows what's inside there, right? So that's quite interesting. Now, horticulture, that's the question that basically the answer is the same to the first one. It's basically the fact that we are sort of a net exporter. So we are not worried that our market is totally swarmed by foreign players, because we tend to produce too much that we actually cannot consume, so we just export out, right? So in New Zealand terms, we always say, Fonterra is the largest exporter of dairy, right? It's the largest exporter, but not the largest exporter, not the largest company, dairy, right? Okay, because if you compare it against those dairy companies that you have in ASEAN or in China, Fonterra is very small. The size is so small, but it's the largest exporter because by the percentage of exports to production is actually big, right? And that's and for the same reason, right? The market is small enough for New Zealand not to worry about quite a lot of things that you tend to worry in the context of Indonesia, right? You tend to worry more like, say, Walmart will be here anytime, and all the multinationals will be here anytime you are happy to invite them. They will be here. So I can't see China not wanting to be here if you actually welcome and smile at them. But they are quite busy with a few other things on their own, and they probably think that Indonesia is another difficult one to which they say we can wait, right? It's not going to be easy for them, right? I think from my perspective. And the mining one is something that New Zealand doesn't do much, so it's more or less the Australia side of things. So it's something that honestly, I can't give you a straightforward answer here. Now, China influence in New Zealand, we like most countries, we have the Confucius Institute, right? We have 3 Confucius Institute across New Zealand. One at University of Auckland, one at Victoria University of Wellington, and one at the Canterbury, right? Canterbury University. Okay, so we have 3 Confucius Institute. In the last 3 years, our Confucius Institute in New Zealand are under a lot of stress because a lot of New Zealanders, has a suspicion that there's a lot of Chinese influence through the Confucius Institute. But I can assure you that in a lot of cases, especially in the University of Auckland case, and even more so in the Wellington, Victoria Wellington case, right? The university that I work in. Oh, and by the way, these students are not just from Victoria; they are from 7 universities in New Zealand, so they are spread across, right? And basically, from where I sit, right, Victoria University of Wellington, the Confucius Institute is always run by an ex-Ministry of Foreign Affairs person, right? That's the New Zealand's presence there. So we always put a person who used to work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to run the center. But no doubt most of the funding of programs, not funding of the center, that means the director is hired by New Zealand government or New Zealand Victoria University, and the government shares certain things. But at the same time, the funding of training like Chinese language, all this is actually the Chinese government. Right? So the funding of the structure and the staff is actually New Zealand. The programs is actually funded by the Chinese side. So this is the structure, right? A very interesting structure, but we were under a lot of pressure to be asked. There's a lot of OIA, like Official Information Act, that has been going around on Chinese influence in New Zealand, but they did question the university, but they didn't go far, but they were after the Confucius Institute in the last 3 years. But the general sense is that there might be some, but so is the Russian and everyone else, right? Right, and then that's because New Zealand is quite neutral, right? We tend to have a lot of freedom of speech, a lot of conversations, very, very open-minded, and a lot of countries are worried that other countries will use that as a platform, right, to start stirring certain things there, right? So if you ask a lot of senior people, in this space, right, they will tell you that there will be, but very definitely they will always attack the education sector first, right, going through the influence on younger people in general. But it won't be just Chinese, if there is, right? It will be other countries involved as well. Not a lot. That's what we suspect.
Yeah, China is indeed a big issue, a big player. I remember that last year in Victoria University of Wellington, we held one training session about China capable. So New Zealand's government is really take this matter very serious. We have 2 questions from our live streaming. The first one is about the most recent global issues, Iran versus US. How it will impact on global economy for ASEAN in particular, ASEAN countries in particular, and how to deal with it. And the other one is the impact of moving the capital to global challenges, particularly in trade sector.
Can I clarify what is the second question?
The second question is the impact of moving the capital
On
on global challenges in future trade. So I have to read. Actually, I'm a bit confused as well.
okay.
So, what is the impact of moving the capital to the global challenges and the future of trade? I'm afraid that it's about the capital.
Okay, movement of capital. I'll try to talk in that direction and see where we get. Now, Iran-US is not new, so it's not like this is the first time we are encountering sanction or anything like that from the US. So for many years, Iran has got sanctions from the US, right, and that affects the economy at the same time. But then the question here is, if you look at Iran's trade in the past, right, what countries do they trade with? In fact, they don't do as much trade as we suspect with a lot of other countries. In fact, Iran is quite resourceful themselves. For the same reason, I think the impact will not be extremely huge in many ways, unless we believe that Indonesia has a lot of trade with Iran. Do you? Not much, right? So, in fact, most of the countries don't because of the economic sanction that has been put in place by the US on them for many, many years that almost locked down the whole country, right? Literally for a long time. So it's something that will never go away, and another attack doesn't make a lot of difference because if there's anything, the bilateral trade between a lot of countries and Iran has already subsided in the past, and we have never actually recovered back to Iran, so I don't think the effect will be very strong. Moving forward, as to the capital, now what seems to be interesting is that there's a lot of conversations around in Asia, right? That capital movement, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a global challenge, but say, for example, in the case of Hong Kong, for example, right? I tend not to want to discuss too much about Hong Kong, but at the same time, the recent drama between Hong Kong and China has in fact led a lot of Hong Kong investors to leave, not necessarily physically, but definitely moving all their capital to Singapore and Shanghai, and in conversation with a lot of parties in New Zealand as well. So some of my New Zealand folks who handle finance back home in New Zealand basically has to fly up to Hong Kong. I say, are you sure you want to go there? Maybe it's a one-way ticket. Right? You might reach there, but you won't be able to leave the airport on the way back. So they go because some of the Hong Kong investors are actually thinking about moving some capital to New Zealand as well, and that's where you know that really, I mean, no, it's not a big capital market, but at least there's still a lot of investment possible. So there are a lot of movement of that kind of thing because of uncertainty, and definitely a lot of movement of capital in and out of US and China at the same time, right? So it's when the US and China war comes, right? It's not just everyone moves out of China. In fact, everyone else is moving out of US too, right? They get hit both ways. In fact, both countries get hit as a result of that. I can't imagine that one of them will move from one country to the other, as in, I all of a sudden I decided to move all my operation from US to China. It doesn't happen. It's always to the third country, right? And that's where you might benefit if you actually smiles at all of them, right? They might all come to Indonesia, right, at the same time. I think it's quite important because they are all looking for the safe haven. And right now they are looking at Australia, which is useless because the fire is put out everything. So New Zealand is actually in good shape, and of course, Singapore is getting a lot of benefits out of it because everyone is actually freeing from, those powerful countries like US, China, but also Hong Kong incident and so on.
Thank you very much, Prof. For our last Q&A session, I would like to have 2 questions from the floor. From this side. Okay. Is there anyone from that side? Oh, Pak Gogor. Okay. Please say. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, we will have 3. Yeah. From name and from which university?
Hi there, my name is Karan, and I'm from the University of Auckland. So you mentioned this is in regards with ASEAN. This is in regards with ASEAN. You mentioned that a key pillar of ASEAN's strength is its general neutrality politically. However, we do know that within ASEAN itself, because its decisions are made on consensus building and each member state often has an equal share of the vote, that within these states there is differences in the bargaining power they have with major powers. So Indonesia is obviously more stronger in bargaining to the US and China. But there are many states within ASEAN like Laos or Myanmar and even to some extent Vietnam where a large amount of their FDI and investment comes from China. And how do you think that could affect the dynamic then politically of ASEAN when some member states are more influenced or be host to China because a lot of their investment comes from China, whereas other member states like Indonesia that are larger are less so when you're in a consensus building organization? Do you think that could lead to potential ruptures or alliances as the global dynamic becomes more unstable and sides have to be chosen?
Kira. Nah, next, Pak Gogor.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm just wondering about your opinion, Professor. It is something probably not directly related to trade, but I like to, it's still probably related to trade, about this role of assertive, very assertive attitude of China in dealing with their neighboring countries in relation to trade as well. You were mentioning in your presentation that China will become a global player in the near future and so on. But if you take a look at in terms of this political perspective a little bit, China is surrounded by two economic giants, which is Republic of Korea and Japan. These two countries are also challenging Chinese lead in dominating the trade in Asia as well as in the neighboring countries. And that's not only the challenges for China in making this country as a global player as well. But if you take a look at from political perspective a little bit, China is still not yet able to solve the problem with Taiwan, which is slowly and growing to become a dominant player in trade as well as politics. Well, all of these kind of circumstances, United States is behind them. And not only that, China is now having unsolved problem with, like you mentioned in your presentation, with India. A border dispute with India is from 1960 something till now is not yet solved. And China has also been very careful with Russia, which is now slowly growing with their reindustrialization to become a trading player in Europe at least. Now, what would you see this as some counter impediment for China to become the global player? And probably because of this kind of challenges and this counter impediment, Chinese is becoming more assertive. Like we have seen in some places, like BRI and all those Chinese initiatives probably is part of their idea in order to solve this counter impediment, become more impediment for their policies in dominating the world trade. Thank you.
Last question.
My name is Garth Panicliffe from the University of Waikato. Given Indonesia's desire to open regulation and make it easier to do business here, and New Zealand's position on the ease of doing business, and the New Zealand-Indonesia partnership, how can you leverage the relationship between the two countries to help Indonesia open up regulation more and doing business?
Those question is for Prof. Siah or?
All right, thanks for another set of excellent questions. So I believe the first one is about ASEAN centrality, right? Decision making and by consensus, and how does ASEAN manage, right? And if you look at some of the slides that I was alerted to, I think you know, ASEAN for ASEAN to come together as a group, right? I think there's still some way to go, right? I think going by consensus is just a way, as we were there in ASEAN Secretariat, right? Going by consensus is just to make sure that you know, some countries don't get voted out every time, Remember yesterday, right? So we go by consensus, but that doesn't mean that we actually have consensus. Right? So it's basically a managed consensus, right? So it's like nudging him and say, hey, agree. They say, okay, agree, right? So basically that's managed consensus. But also if you think about it this way, right? I mean, some countries will be more powerful than others, and that's quite typical even in European Union and the world, right? So you know that, you know, we coming into partnership with the US and China, you are always going to have less power. But the ASEAN concept is always about extra or external competition rather than regional competition, right? And I remember about 7 months ago when I was there, but also in Yanti's session back in Wellington as well. We, you know, at the end of the day, right, ASEAN comes together because we believe that ASEAN, when they are a group, they are stronger. Okay? Because Cambodia cannot fend for itself, right? Laos cannot fend for itself. Myanmar cannot fend for itself. I'm not asking you to go and donate money to them, but I'm saying that, look, if you guys, I mean, Indonesia on its own can stand, but then I think Indonesia has got neighbors, and you normally want to really partner with your neighbors so that you are also protected in some ways, and that's how China also wants to be protected with at least their 14 neighbors, not that their neighbors actually like them, right, to start with. Now, and for that reason, right, bargaining power makes a lot of difference, but also if you think about, if Indonesia wants to bully any of the other 10, it's quite easy, right? Don't say I say that. If you start bullying, don't say Prof. Siah thing, we can bully you, no problem. But also at the same time, you think about, you know, if Indonesia is such a young country, and if all the young countries actually come together, right, as a group, you are half the size of, you know, India, half the size of China. It gives you a better chance, right? It gives you a better chance because then you won't be in the same league as Australia and India because you'll be bigger, right, than them, right? Because as a group, ASEAN will be stronger, right? Okay, and then let's go back to the consensus part, right? There's no such thing as fully consensus, I must say, right, within any meetings. But then in the New Zealand context, we consult on policies for years. Nothing happens, right? I suspect that in some countries in Asia and ASEAN, right, that you normally don't consult so much. Right? Normally it's done, and the president says it's done, right? Rather than things go fast. So in the case of China, even, right, sometimes some of our goods in particular are in the ship to China, and they change their policy the next day. And that's quite common because they make a move just the next day. They don't consult for 2 years like we do in New Zealand. So sometimes we do have a bit of a culture shock there. Did I answer your question, or you were trying to go for something deeper?
Generally, but it was also more targeted towards when you're talking about the friction between major powers like China and the US. If there's kind of a divergence in which sides are more dependent on, let's say, China, you know, and because neutrality is a key pillar of success, how might that play out?
Okay. One, your enemy is your friend. So if your ASEAN colleagues are your friends, then you have a better chance, right? And because the superpowers is going to come to ASEAN and pick one by one, right? And that's very common. So last year, let me try to recall. Last year, May, I was in Bangkok as part of New Zealand's team to be a part of the Mekong Institute discussion, right? The Mekong discussion, okay, CMLBT, right? It's very funny. It's the first time that I see a lot of sort of official / professors, so think tanks, right, attacking each other. Okay, you know who attacks who, right? So Thailand and Vietnam attacks Cambodia and Laos. Why did you take China's money? In front of everyone, and the Chinese was sitting here. The Japanese was sitting there. And then New Zealand is sitting there. I don't know what to say, right? And then, you know, the other countries were just quiet, like Singapore and everyone. And then the Thai and the Vietnamese would be attacking those few others representing. It's supposed to be an academic senior sort of / think tank operation that we go there to swap notes, right? But they actually say, look, you take money, do you know what you're doing? right? And it turns out to be not very nice. Luckily, the tea break came quite quickly, so it actually cooled down after we all go after food the ASEAN way again, right? But they do that, right? It's starting to feel that within those countries there are sessions whereby I have come across heated queries about why would Cambodia and Laos do that. And I was personally at the Golden Triangle, right, in that trip as well, right? I was standing there at the Antara in Bangkok, and basically I see the Golden Triangle, right, the river, the Mekong River, whereby I have Cambodia in front of me, I have Myanmar on my left, and I'm standing there just within the boundaries of Bangkok. And I read across to the Cambodia side. So some of those folks ask me, hey, you know what are those words there? Do you recognize, are those Chinese words? I say, yes, those are Chinese words. They say, what do they write there? So I say, that is called the China-Cambodia Free Trade Zone. Right, but that is in Cambodia, by the way, yeah. And basically along those sites, right, it's called the China-Cambodia Free Trade Zone, but at the same time, it's actually all casinos, right? And because China cannot gamble, they decided to all gamble in Cambodia. That's the plan, right? And there are things like that, and so, you know, Thailand and Vietnam would question why would Cambodia do such a thing and let the Chinese in front of the Chinese, by the way. And so the two groups of think tanks in China were quite defensive. They were like saying, why are you attacking me? I'm the nice guy, you know, this and that. So you know, internally there are some conflicts inside there, no doubt, right? Especially about China's influence. But at the same time, I think, you know, if you try to be neutral towards US and China, that's the safest thing to do. But dealing with each individual country, even within ASEAN, right, they are actually different bilateral friends, right, as opposed to that. I think I've more or less addressed yours. Let me quickly jump to his question, which is like 20 questions at the same time. I'll make the long answer short, right? China is getting very assertive because they realize that after all these years of hard work, right, how come people are still telling them what to do? So they are very upset about it, right, in general, especially like the tribunal thing that I mentioned around, you know, I remember when I read the China Daily in one of the years around that tribunal period, right, he did mention, right, the Chinese presidency did mention something along the lines that once upon a time you want us cheap, now you think we are too cheap. Right, which is true, right? Once upon a time everything is made in China, but now you say that you are anti-market because you are so cheap that you are breaking the laws or rules of World Trade Organization and so on. So he was very upset about it. Part of the problem with some of these things that you have mentioned around is the fact that China will never have the soft power, right? Which is why in the Belt Road Initiative it was a blank sheet of paper, because China knows that it can't lead. It can't go to any country and say, Indonesia, I'm going to do this. You want to join me? Right, so when they say that, it's basically saying that I'm going to lead you, right? Okay, sometimes it's like that. So China knows that it doesn't have that soft power to say, I'm going to lead you guys. So it did came with a blank sheet of paper. Say, guys, this is the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative. What do you want to do? If you want to do something, I can work with you. So you tell me what first, right? So that's where the confusion comes, right? They know they cannot lead, but they still try to do something, and if you don't want to do something, they can be very upset, very disturbed at the same time. Their soft power is very weak, and as I point out as well, I don't think the soft power will ever go away, because my understanding is that, you know, globally, no one, most of us are still not used to the fact that might be a change of regime. We are used to the regime of US, Japan, Germany, you know, the usual suspects, the big boys, the developed club, UK and so on. Nobody is used to a country that is out of that list that has been there for what, 50 years? To jump in and all of a sudden say, you know, I'm actually going to take a few of these as a leader, right? And China is definitely not there yet. It's having a strong influence because it's the largest trading partner to about 123 countries. US has the rest, right? US has about 75. Right, so between the two of them, they have close to 200 countries in the world. The other 22 countries are actually not countries, they are islands, so never mind, right? Forget about them. Right, so between the two of them, they own basically the largest trading partner to the the rest of the world. And because of that reason, right, you can see that they are strong and they can exert hard power, but not soft power. When I say hard power, it's probably about things like economics, where they were strong. They say money, keep the change, and we do something, right? So that would be my guess, Mr. Koko. I hope that comes close to doing that. You want me to speak on behalf of Indonesia?
Speaking on behalf of New Zealand about what advice you would give in leveraging the relationship between both countries to improve trade regulation between.
You see, I guess that's the reason why you're here, right? Right. I think, and it's not being critical to whether it's Indonesian or in particular New Zealanders as well. So one of the things that we face, right, in New Zealand, okay, just be crystal clear. This is nothing against anyone at all. So what we face here is that in New Zealand, right, I mean, if you talk about any business, they will tell you I have the best product on earth. The only problem is that actually that is not the best product on earth if you actually visit Earth, right? Okay, so because you haven't traveled, that doesn't mean you don't have other products from Australia or from US, and think about it, right? I mean, the dairy products in New Zealand prices did come down, right? So what? Is the New Zealand milk different from the US milk? No, the answer is no. Maybe it's yes, but you don't sell it as such, right? And that's the challenge there, right? So there's a sense that it's a very unilateral thinking. It's something like you sit in Indonesia and you think, I think New Zealanders only can deal with cows and sheep, right? Which is true, but we also do a lot of high technology things, right, back in there. But it's just that we don't sell it, you don't bother to find it. So there's a lot of misinformation, right? I was talking to our two ambassadors yesterday. Back in New Zealand, we don't promote Indonesia that much, right? I mean, no doubt, Tantowi, right? Tantowi happens to be here apparently, and some of my folks saw him on the flights, right? Right. So he's downstairs or something like that today. Yanti told me, and basically, we are trying to promote that through this system, right? So the students are here because I actually want them to understand, right, how to connect to Indonesia, right? And I want to bring the Indonesian here, not just you guys, but also the companies that we met, BRI Microfinance, which we met, the ASEAN Secretariat, the area, they are all housed here, right? They are not owned by New Zealand, to see the perspective from here, right? So the perspective on both sides are quite important. And what I expect from us, and Jonathan will be doing the same as the ambassador as well for Indonesia, is to be able to, for us, people like us who are connected to Indonesia directly to this trip or other things, is to be able to tell a better story about Indonesia when we go back, right? So that people can understand a bit more about the potential of Indonesia rather than to say, we only know China and US, right? We don't really like India, so, and that's it, full stop. Right? And for all we know, we just need Australia, right? Which actually doesn't like New Zealand either, right? And the farmers doesn't like the prisoners or something like that, right? So there is a lot to say, and I think Indonesia is a very difficult, uncertain market, right? And of course, Indonesia has to sort of make sure that a lot more is promoted in terms of understanding, so that the policy is transparent. Maybe as transparent as Singapore, I don't know, could be, right, over time, so that people, when they invest, they will be like saying, okay, definitely I'm not going to lose every cent. There's a good chance that I will earn money, I might not earn money, but I'm not going to lose every cent, right? And that kind of assurance is actually good, because if you think about New Zealand's businesses tends to be small, and when I say small, it's really micro for you guys, because you guys are big. Your small is our big, right? Our small is really your super micro, right? And for that same reason, a lot of the New Zealand businesses doesn't have so much money to invest, and so if they invest in Indonesia or Jakarta, they really cannot lose their shirt, right? And for the same reason, then they need more uncertainty. And if New Zealand businesses is to make a choice of Jakarta above Surabaya or Jakarta above Kuala Lumpur, then they need to feel that they are more assured, right? Right now, they are all thinking about Singapore, but Singapore is too easy to understand, but quite difficult market, very competitive. That doesn't mean that it's better than Jakarta, but they still go for it. Why? because they can understand how Singapore operates. Doesn't mean that they will make money, but at least they know how to get in and feel that there is some certainty there. So I think from the Indonesian side, it can be useful to promote that transparency. From the New Zealand side, it will be good to actually understand the potential, like we discussed before, Gav, risks can turn into opportunities big time. Risks and opportunities are the same thing, literally, right? Somebody has to take the first steps, it's always who comes in first. Okay.
Thank you very much, Prof. For the last part, I would like to ask Pak Gogor to deliver concluding remarks a bit, Pak, so we can have some highlights on our session for today. Please, Pak.
Thank you, Moderator Ibu Yanti. Thank you, Professor, for your insight about the global challenges and the future of trade implication for policies. This lecture is very interesting and very enlightening for us, especially for our official that has to deliver the better and more updated analysis for our minister. And I also appreciate our official that has used and seized this opportunity to share wisdom and thought and knowledge with Professor Siah. And I also very welcome and very grateful with the opportunity to meet and to discuss with professor and the students from 7 university. I did my regret. I thought you all from the same university, but actually you're from 7 different universities in New Zealand. So please accept our regret for these mistakes. In the next step, obviously, what we have discussed here will report to our minister. And I believe Pak Samidi, I call him Mr. Chancellor, is more or less like the chief of our training training department in this ministry, to write down concluding remarks for our minister. Last but not least, obviously, we have got very enlightened and very interesting insight from you, Professor. Thank you very much. And obviously, we hope that this is not the end of this exchange of knowledge. We are hoping that in the near future, we can have this kind of discussion again. And so please, we welcome if we invite you again, or maybe we can send off some of our official to New Zealand, so that we can exchange information and knowledge for our mutual benefits. The topic itself is quite interesting. I like to highlight some of them, like the challenges that we face in the near future. We have heard some of them and we have put some of them in our analysis. But from your perspective, we got different one. We got different angle of perspective. This obviously enrich of knowledge about the global trade, the trend, the possible extrapolation in the near future. What would it like, and what will be the challenges, and how do we anticipate them in the near future? This is important for us because this is the place where the latest decision will be made by the president. So we are very grateful for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge, your ideas that has been shared with us this afternoon. That's maybe the concluding remarks, and I believe the detail will be provided by my friend here, Pak Samidi, and I believe that also will be put in our website, so our colleagues from different universities in New Zealand will be able to follow and continue, and can also interactively communicate with us in the near future. We are also open for discussion with our international community, because the president has always said that what we need in the near future is to be more and more collaborative. We are very understand that we are not being able to solve these complex and disruptive circumstances by ourselves, by or alone capability. We must collaborate, we must cooperate for our mutual benefits, because everything is getting so disruptive today. We will never know what will happen in the Natuna island with the Chinese fleet and Indonesian Navy fleet. We will never know what will happen the next. But we do believe that those disruptive situations can only be solved if we do collaborative activities with the mind to expand and to become more and more open-minded and put collaborative and mutual understanding for mutual benefits. Thank you very much, Professor, again, and all the students. It's the postgraduate or both the postgraduate and graduate students from different universities of New Zealand. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I believe Prof. Siah wants to give his concluding remarks as well.
No, I'm not going to conclude anything. I'm just going to say again, thank you, Gogo and Chancellor and Yanti for making this arrangement. And I believe that I was so full for my sandwich lunch that I couldn't taste the extremely nice looking, spicy, Indonesian lunch, unfortunately. So that was a very bad mistake on my part. But otherwise, thanks for having me here, and thanks for hosting us from New Zealand. On behalf of them and myself, I thank you for the session. And just two more items. One is the fact that I want to alert you all, and that one I can speak on behalf of our New Zealand side as well, that Indonesia is indeed on New Zealand's radar in the midterm, in the short term and midterm, because it's flagged as one of the 5 countries that we want to focus and enhance our relationship with. Right, so bear that in mind. So if you see a lot more people coming through, or feel free to engage, because that will, or you want to send another 10,000 public servants to our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Knock on the door, but don't give them 10,000; they'll be scared. But give them a few hundred; they will be quite receptive to about that kind of things, because we are trying to push hard on the ties, because New Zealand now realize that beyond Australia, Indonesia is the nearest neighbor after Australia, who is on fire, right, as we speak. Okay, now finally, can I get my class representative to give 3 gifts, right, to our special host?
Actually, I'm going to have the session as well, so we have exchange gifts.
Okay.
No worries, Prof. Because you've already mentioned about that.
Yeah.
Pak Samidi and Pak Samidi, please present the token souvenir for Prof. Siah. Go. After that. that's all for today. Thank you very much for your presence in this session. Thank you very much for all of your positive contributions, your questions, and your responses. Very valuable for the liveliness of this session. Thank you very much for our guests. So next day, I believe that you will depart to Kuala Lumpur. Have a safe flight and have a safe trip. Enjoy Jakarta one more day. Thank you very much, Prof. Siah. Thank you very much, Mr. Gogor and everybody. Thank you very much. See you next time in our next serial lecture session or our next training session. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. Big applause to all of us. Kepada teman-teman semua, untuk peserta, mohon nanti mengisi tautan evaluasi ada di sana untuk acara kita hari ini. Kemudian setelah ini kita akan foto bersama. Di mana? Foto bersama di sini. We will have our group photo in here, all of us together, and the next one we will have it downstairs, a more beautiful view. Okay.